Well, this talk is going to focus specifically on Christmas. Now, tomorrow is the beginning of Advent, so this is a very, very relevant presentation. Now, I love Christmas. I'm sure all of us do. From my various beginning, what I can remember about my early childhood was mostly related around Christmas. I certainly can remember Christmas 1969 well. I got some good presents in 1969. Things began to go downhill in 1970 and 71. I didn't get many good presents, but it began to pick up again in 1972 onwards. Then I got old enough to buy my own presents, so Christmas was good after that. One of the earliest photos I have of myself was me probably only about 6 or 7 months old, and I'm sitting under a Christmas tree. And I always love Christmas. Every year coming around again, it gives me that sense of completion for the year as well, especially when we have extended holidays around that period. But unfortunately, not everyone loves Christmas, and for different reasons. I'm focusing here today to talk about, or to focus on, what is good, what is true about Christmas. I'm going to focus on some aspects about what is false about Christmas as well. So we need to purify Christmas, our understanding of Christmas and how we celebrate it. Because it is changing, and we're living in a world of great change, and not all that change is good, as we can obviously see. Now, as Catholics, most Catholics who are growing up and practice their faith in whatever degree would go to Mass on Christmas. Unfortunately, there's too many Christmas and Easter Catholics today. They go for the big events. The churches are full at Christmas time. They're full during midnight Mass, and they're full around Easter time. And there's a lot of those people sadly don't come throughout the rest of the year. But at least they come for Christmas. And of course, the church has a liturgy specifically for Christmas Day. And the very word itself, Christ Mass, is a very Catholic word, the Mass, etc. And this is why we get some groups. Now let's focus firstly on religious groups who don't like Christmas. You might know a little bit of English history. You might know a little bit about the Reformation in England, and then later on the English Civil War. And we saw the Puritans rise up and dominate in England during the 17th century, particularly under Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell. This is a period known as the Interregnum, when there was no kings in England. The Stuarts were temporarily overthrown, and Cromwell was ruling in England as a Puritan, as Lord Protector. This is around 1649 to 1661. Well, the Puritans abolished Christmas. They're a little bit too strict, a little bit too over the top. But one reason why they would have abolished Christmas was not because of the excesses they would have seen in the revelry and the celebration, and maybe a little bit too much to eat and a little bit too much to drink. They opposed it ideologically or theologically. They would say, well, it's not in the Bible, and it's a popish thing. It's too Catholic. Mass, having these feasts, it's not in the Bible, so we shouldn't be celebrating it. It's another one of those Catholic semi-pagan corruptions or accretions that's come into authentic Christianity. So we need to purge ourselves of these celebrations that are not biblically based. And you also get that mentality with, say, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses. They use the same reasoning. It's too Catholic in origin and in name, and it's not in the Bible. You don't have people celebrating Christmas in the Bible. And if we're biblical Christians, we shouldn't be celebrating Christmas, especially like the Catholics do. Well, actually, I can go to one verse in the Bible and very simply and very quickly show you that we should celebrate Christmas. Because on the night that Jesus was born, the angels celebrated. And that's enough for me. We go to Luke 2, verses 13 to 14, and what do we have the angels saying? Glory to God in the highest. They're appearing in a large number, in an array. We get the word in Greek strategoi, like we get strategy from that word. They're in battle formation. And they're crying out, they're singing out, they're glorifying God for this wonderful event. They're singing and praising God. They're celebrating because God has come into the world as man. And they understand the big picture here. They understand the salvific action of God here. This isn't benefiting the angels. The angels don't, these angels that are celebrating, they don't need redemption. They're celebrating because God's bringing forth, rolling out his plan of salvation for humanity. And if the angels could celebrate, well, we should be celebrating. There's nothing wrong with celebrating something good. Okay? And this is something good. This is something very good. In fact, is there anything better than this except for Christ's death and resurrection? Mary's yes at the Annunciation, behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it done unto me according to thy word. That yes, which was free, total, self-giving, that yes opened heaven. You go to Mark's Gospel, the word there in Greek is skiazamos. We get the English words scissors, cut, to tear. Mary's yes tore open heaven. Mary's yes enabled God to come out of heaven and into the world in the form of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, God-man. Okay, now God could have come into the world directly, and we'll look at this later on. He could have come into the world directly. Not through Mary, but that wasn't the plan, and for an important reason. Mary's yes opened heaven, and we call Mary as a consequence, gate of heaven. She's the gate through which God came into the world as one of us. Without this event, without Mary's yes, without Christmas, we would not have had Easter. Would not have had Good Friday or the resurrection. Because for that to occur, there needed to be, the Messiah needed to have human nature, to be able to hang on the cross and to rise from the dead. And that's why we celebrate Christmas. Okay. Christmas is about the birth of Jesus. And for us at a beginning level, we would ask the question, well, when did this happen? We're celebrating it in the liturgy, December 25. Kids being taught about Christmas think, oh, that's when Jesus was born. That's his birthday, because we all have birthdays. And when was Jesus' birthday? Well, December 25. Okay. Oh, what year? Obviously, the year 1. Or the year 0. Or what? Okay, it's a bit confusing here. What year was Jesus born? These are important questions. Young kids ask these questions. Adults ask these questions. If adults didn't ask these questions, we wouldn't be calling this year 2017, because we're numbering it from what event, involving which person. 2017 since what? Well, okay, let's try and get some answer here. Well, Jesus wasn't really born in the year 0 or the year 1. You can't have a year 0. You have a 1 BC and then you have the 1 AD. Well, Jesus wasn't really born at the beginning of 1 AD either. The first calculations we have, in fact, 2017, this number we are living in today, this year number we're living in today, that number derives from the work of a Greek monk in the 5th century named Dionysius Exiguus, or in English, Denis the Short. And Denis the Short, he made a sincere attempt to work out how many years from his time backwards to the birth of Jesus. He did his calculations and he knows that Jesus was born in the reign of Augustus Caesar, okay, when Herod the Great was ruling in Judea and Samaria, etc. All right, and he came to the conclusion that it was X number of years from that moment until his time, and we followed that through to 2017. When in actual fact, Dionysius, in all sincerity, got it wrong. An innocent mistake, but he got it wrong. In fact, really, we still don't know for certain what is right. When I first prepared this talk, and I presented it actually in Perth last year, I was pretty sure that we can say that Jesus was born no later than 4 BC, because he's born in the reign of Herod the Great, and Herod the Great, by our modern calculations, dies 4 BC. And that would have been in the 20th year of the reign of Augustus Caesar, who became the first emperor of Rome, and he began his reign, actually no, 27 BC, so that would have been in the 23rd year of the reign of Augustus Caesar. And Augustus went on to reign until 14 AD. But actually, now a year later, I can't say 4 BC or 5 BC or 6 BC with any level of certainty, because other readings I've come across very recently tell us, well, you know, it's plausible that Herod the Great lived to as late as 1 BC, and that Jesus would have been born maybe around 2 or 3 BC, rather than 4, 5 or 6 BC. And the reasoning for this is based on these censuses that we read about in the New Testament. I mean, in the Gospel, why does St. Joseph and Our Lady, why do they move from Nazareth to Bethlehem at the time Jesus is about to be born? It's because of a proclamation, a decree issued by who? Augustus Caesar, for purposes of registration. It doesn't actually say for the purpose of paying tax. Middle Eastern people are not good at paying tax. Okay, so I don't think it would have worked. I'm sure Joseph and Mary, being very honest, would have paid all their taxes. But nevertheless, this was the registration. And when we go to sources outside of the Gospels, we do know that Augustus Caesar was very fond of having registration, or having censuses. He had one in 8 BC, he had one in AD 6, but he also had one in 3 to 2 BC. And this was for the purpose of getting everyone to go back to their place of birth, to register, in order to give allegiance to Augustus Caesar as emperor, as the first in the empire. And so people believe, and rightfully so, there's good grounding for this, that St. Joseph and Our Lady were responding to this decree around 3 to 2 BC. So Jesus is born around 2 BC. Herod the Great dies around 1 BC. That's where I'm moving to at the moment. But again, maybe more research could find out something more in the future. It's very important. What day then? Okay, so let's come to some type of agreement around 2 BC. If that's the case, this is not 2017, is it? 2019. And I'm 2 years closer to retirement. No, not really. And we're 2 years older. No, not really. Okay? But it's always a lot of fun because we actually get everything wrong. People were saying yesterday, 1st of December is the beginning of summer. No, it's not. It's not the beginning of summer. It's not the beginning of winter in the Northern Hemisphere either. As we'll see, that's around December 21, and for good reason. And this is Saturday, and it's the second last day of the week. No, it's not. It's the last day of the week. Sunday's the first day of the week. And this is December, and it's the 12th month of the year. No, it's not. It's the 10th month of the year. That's why it's called decimal, decade, right? 10th month. Nov, 9, Oct, 8, Sept, 7, okay? This talk will reveal and give reasons as to why the ancients were a lot wiser than we give them credit for, and that we're not so wise as much as we think we are. Anyway, now what about the actual birthday of Jesus? Was it December 25? Well, we really don't know. I remember when I was still very young, probably in primary school, and I was being told, and I went to a public school, I never went to a Catholic school, but we got taught about Christmas. It was before the rabid secularization that prevails upon us today. And I was told that, Jesus was not born in winter time. So he couldn't have been born in December as we celebrate, because in winter time, in that part of the world, in the Middle East and in Judea, etc., around Bethlehem, it's too cold to have shepherds out at night. For shepherds to be out at night, it would have been in warmer times, maybe spring, maybe summer. There was actually one father of the church, Clement of Alexandria. Now, Clement was a very important figure in 2nd century Christianity. He was the second head of the great catechetical school in Alexandria. We have a lot to thank Clement for. A lot of saints came out of that school, and writers, etc. Well, Clement said that Jesus was born on the 20th of May. And I'm thinking, oh, that's cute, because I'm born on the 21st of May. So my birthday's next to Jesus' birthday. But then again, as I was growing up, that would have been an even bigger problem for me because I didn't get many presents around 1970, 71, as I said. And if I had my birthday next to Christmas, I would have got even less presents. Only once a year getting presents rather than two. So I hope it's not May 20, but it doesn't worry me now. But if it is May 20, I could go with that. Why? Because that's in spring. And there's something about the way God acts. God doesn't just act accidentally or capriciously. In all his movements, he's acting in accordance with a symbol and to give meaning. And to be born in spring would have been appropriate because spring is about new life, resurrection. Winter for the ancients represented death, burial. Spring is about coming back to life again, resurrection. That's what Jesus was all about. Coming into the world to give humanity new life and resurrection. So I would go with the view that Jesus was born in springtime in the Northern Hemisphere. So it could have been April, could have been May, whatever, all right? Okay, well, why do we celebrate December 25? Is it another one of those Catholic corruptions? You know, is it another one of those papal decisions that distort the original gospel? Complicate things, add things that shouldn't be there, etc. No, not really. You've got to put it in its historical context. Plus understanding pagan religions back in those early centuries when Christianity was fledgling and beginning to get a foothold in the world. Go back to the time, for example, look, we have evidence that Christmas was being celebrated on December 25 in the 4th century. It was accepted in the West before the year 354. In the East, from the year 379 onwards, we have evidence that Christmas was being celebrated on December 25. It was also celebrated in certain parts on the 6th of January. St. John Chrysostom's writings tell us that. That doesn't really matter. Even today, there are churches in communion with Rome that celebrate Christmas on the 6th of January. Okay, like the Ukrainians, for example. That's fine, it's not a problem. It's no reason to debate and have an argument over. But anyway, from our perspective, why was December 25th consolidated as that date? You can go back to Gregory the Great, who was Pope in the late 6th century, early 7th century, 590 to 605. And looking to the north from Rome, you had those barbarians in Germany. A lot of bad stuff came out of Germany, a lot of good stuff as well, but the barbarians up there in the north, and they're worshipping all sorts of things. And they worship Saturnalia, etc. And they have all these feasts. And December 25 was an important feast for many pagan religions. Back to this thing about the beginning of summer, winter, spring, autumn. These cycles revolved around what we call the equinoxes and the solstices. Okay? Now they are, I'll give you the dates. We're about to approach, for us here, the summer solstice, which is December 21. That's the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. Then we come to the equinox, March 21. Then we come to the June 21, which for us is the winter solstice, and the Northern Hemisphere, the summer solstice. And then we come to another equinox, September 21. Now, the important date for us, let's look at December 21. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's that day which is the shortest day of the year. Shortest day by way of the length of daylight. For us, it's the longest day of the year. The day of the year which we have the longest amount of daylight and the shortest amount of nighttime. For the ancients, the way they looked at it, these ancients that worshipped dying and rising gods, their gods died on December 21. That was the shortest, the darkest day of the year. December 25 was the first day that they could measure that the length of daylight was beginning to expand again, extend again. So that was the day the gods came back to life. That was the day, for example, where they worshipped the rebirth of the unconquerable sun, the invincible sun, the Solar Invictus. I actually driving down Parramatta Road yesterday towards the city, and around where Sydney University is, on the left there's this store, Solar Invictus. Okay, so we've kept it somewhere as a remnant. The invincible sun. The invincible sun has died on December 21 and is reborn December 25. Now, if you're a strategist in those centuries and you want to evangelize pagan peoples, and it's very hard to do so, what you've got to do, you've got to try and shift them gently. So don't go in there hacking away and destroying all their feasts and celebrations. Go in there and baptize them. Go in there and transition. Say, oh, you can still celebrate that day, but don't celebrate the rebirth of your unconquerable son or invincible son. Celebrate the birth of the true unconquerable, invincible son, S-O-N. And that's Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And that's good. We'll celebrate, we'll change that day, the nature of that day, Christianize it and have it focus on Jesus Christ, and we'll celebrate his birthday. Even though we don't know if that was his actual birthday, it doesn't really matter. I have grandparents, my wife have grandparents, they don't know their birthdays either, but they still celebrate. They pick a day and they celebrate. All right? Okay, because historically they were born. We know they were born because they exist, and Jesus exists, so he was born, so we don't know the day, so we'll choose one. And we say December 25, and let's go back there 9 months. Go back to March, December 25, plot March 25. That's where we'll plot the Annunciation. That's when we'll celebrate the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary and saying, "How full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women." And Mary's response, "Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it done unto me according to thy word." Let's put it there. And that's so convenient. Why is it so convenient? It's because in that time in history, the Romans, their first month of the year was March. March, April, May, June, July. It became July. It was originally Sextilia. August was Sextilia. It becomes Augustus, August, September, Sept, 7, October, 8, Nov, 9, December, 10th. So it fits beautifully. We'll put we'll open the year. The year begins with the month of March, and we'll have the beginning of Christianity celebrated in the beginning of the year, the first month of the year, on March 25, and link that 9 months later to December 25, the 10th month. And then you had, of course, poor old February. February would be the 12th month, and it's the shortest month of the year because it picked up what days were left over. Okay, that's keeping it simple, but the Romans had their calendar in that way from about 700 BC onwards. And even after Julius Caesar reformed the calendar in 46 BC, March was the first month, because March is the god named after their god of war, Mars, March. And they loved Mars because that Romans were so inclined, you know, wars, battles, shedding blood, red relates to blood, etc., etc. All right. Now, the word, so that's basically, keeping it simple, how we get December 25 as the day we celebrate the birth of Jesus. Okay, what about calling it Christ Mass? You know, we still do, don't we? As Catholics we do, and Eastern Orthodox people do, and it's appropriate for all of us as Catholics and Eastern Orthodox to name that day Christ Mass, because we believe in the Mass. It's just the Mass in which we celebrate the birth of Christ. Many Protestant Christians who believe in Christmas, who celebrate Christmas, happily call it Christmas, but they don't actually realise that the word Christmas relates to Mass, the Mass celebrating the birth of Jesus. And so there's a bit of an inconsistency there, isn't there? They don't have a Mass, they don't believe in the Mass, but they're happy to call this feast Christ Mass. The Mass, that's because they don't know its origins. They just go with it. We need to understand the reason for that word. It's the Mass in which we celebrate the birth of Christ, and for short, Christ Mass. And we need to keep it that name because there are forces out there, very strong forces out there, who want to change the name. It's their way of unbaptizing. As we gradually shifted that day to be focused on Christ and his birth, modern society is slowly shifting that day to focus away from Jesus and his birth. Now, I remember growing up, even in my 20s, and I got to know other Catholics who would look at that word Xmas, X-M-A-S, with grave suspicion and negativity and criticism and say, that's part of the process in modern society to take Christ out of Christmas. And my response to that is, yeah, perhaps. For some, yes. Some would use Xmas as a comfortable way of taking Christ quietly out of it, because we're not really that Christian, and to use the name Christ or to refer to Christ is a bit embarrassing, and we've got to appeal to the non-Christians in our society. And if I'm going to say Merry Christmas on my shop front window, I don't want to be exclusive or offend anybody, so we'll keep it as Christmas. Look, you need to be suspicious about Xmas. You need to be. But at the same time, you don't have to be overly hostile to it, because it can be still interpreted in a legitimate Catholic or Christian way, because the X is really the Greek letter chi, which forms the first letter of the Greek word Christos. Okay, so if you know what the word Christos looks like in Greek, it starts with an X, which was the letter chi, C-H-I, ch, okay, in Greek. So it's just an abbreviated way, a legitimate abbreviated way of saying Christmas. But I don't encourage you using it. I still don't like to use Xmas. I feel I'm lazy and a bit compromised in using it. But it's not totally depraved as a way of expressing the word. Another good and true and beautiful thing about Christmas carols, and we'll mention them more so again later on, but I want to focus right now on one particular carol that is not my favourite, but it's very deep and rich, and that's the 12 Days of Christmas carol. On the first day of Christmas, my true love sent to me, etc., etc. We're going to have a look at this Christmas carol, almost verse by verse, and we're going to understand how it's code language. The origins of this Christmas carol, this is a Catholic Christmas carol originating from England in the time of the Protestant Reformation. It was a catechetical way of passing on the Catholic faith in a time of terrible persecution. So, my true love said to me, who's the true love? That was code for Jesus Christ. Partridge in a pear tree. What is the partridge? Represents Jesus Christ, because that bird is willing to sacrifice itself, if necessary, to protect its young, by feigning injury to draw away predators. And Jesus sacrificed himself for us. Then we have the two turtle doves. The two turtle doves is code for the two testaments, Old and New Testaments. The three French hens stands for the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. Three theological virtues. The four calling birds stands for the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The five golden rings represent the first five books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. Let me hope I get this one right. Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus. I'm not sure if I've got them in the right order, but I've got the right names. Then we've got the 6 geese are laying, the 6 days of creation. The 7 swans are swimming, the sevenfold gifts of the Holy Spirit. The 8 maids are milking, the 8 beatitudes. the 9 ladies dancing, the 9 choirs of angels. The 10 lords a leaping are the 10 commandments. The 11 pipers piping are the 11 faithful apostles. And the 12 drummers drumming are the 12 points of belief in the Apostles' Creed. And I think I only realised all that a couple of years ago, and I think it's very beautiful. And it's a one. I presume it was an important tool in those terrible days of persecution. Well, anyway, back onto this point I was emphasising a little bit earlier on. When we celebrate Christmas, we're celebrating God becoming man. But I want to really impress upon this point the significance of it. We hold talks at another parish regularly, at St Michael's the Archangel at Belfield. We've been doing that for 22 years. And one day there was a Protestant gentleman who came to the talk. He was a very nice fellow, lovely. And after the talk, we were having tea and coffee. We got chatting, and he just said, look, I'm not really comfortable with that picture on the wall over there. The picture of Mary and Jesus. Mary's so big and Jesus is so small. You know, it's a Madonna picture. Mary, mother of Jesus, it's a baby Jesus in her arms. And he was saying, well, you know, that represents to me how Catholics disproportionately emphasize Mary and underemphasize Jesus. Mary is an adult, Jesus just an infant baby. And I can understand how he comes to that conclusion. But I fortunately was inspired quickly enough to respond and saying, I tell you why it's important to have that depiction. I mean, we've got many different types of depictions of Jesus and Mary in all our churches around the world. Of course, the Madonna and child depiction is very common, and we see it almost everywhere. And it's a good thing. Why? Because that tells us that Jesus Christ came into the world, not just as a baby, but came into the world through a mother, a woman. And why is that so important? Okay, you're telling us what we all know. But what the theological importance of this, the Christological importance, or the importance of it from the point of view of soteriology, that is the study, the theology of salvation. It's all about salvation, isn't it? Jesus coming into the world is about saving sinners, salvation. Well, who saved from what? Saved from hell, saved from original sin. Well, who committed this original sin? Well, our original parents. If you believe in original sin, hopefully you do, okay? Not everyone does these days. Original sin committed by our original parents, Adam and Eve. It was their sin which offended God and ruptured the relationship between God and humanity. Now, the sin of Adam and Eve was of infinite magnitude. Why do we say that? Because you measure the degree of a sin against the dignity of the person who's offended. And the dignity here is the dignity of God, and He is infinite. So this sin of pride based on disobedience, disobedience based on pride, was of infinite degree. To do the reparation for this sin, however, well, the reparation had to come from humanity, because it was humanity who offended God. But here we have the problem. To do the act of reparation, the act of reparation had to be of infinite value, because this offence was of infinite degree, infinite magnitude. But when measuring the ability to do an act of infinite reparation, well, we have to look at the person who needs to do that act. And they are human creatures. And human creatures, being creatures, cannot do anything of infinite merit. And this is the rut we were in. This is the hole we had buried ourselves in. We could offend God to an infinite degree, but we couldn't do an act of infinite reparation. And strictly speaking, if God was just a judge, just a legalist, He could rightfully turn around and say to humanity, look, I'm sorry, but you knew the rules of engagement. You knew if you ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that you would die the death. A double death. death in your body and death in your soul, eternal damnation. You had full knowledge and gave full consent, and you get what you deserve because you were forewarned. Fortunately, or gracefully, God is not like that. And his mercy and love for us, freely, unmerited, he will choose to save us even though we don't deserve to. Now, God could have saved us in any way he chose. Okay? He's freely choosing to save us. He's not compelled to. We never did anything. We had no merit on our own part to compel God or make God save us. God saves us freely, and he's free to choose how he will save us. But God also wants to, in his mercy, still wants to satisfy a justice element here. His mercy is that he will save us even though we don't deserve to, but he's going to do it in a way which satisfies the justice element. And the justice element says here that humanity has to do the act of reparation. And it has to be the human family of Adam. So God will become one of the family of Adam. He will become a member of the family of Adam in order to represent the family of Adam, in order to do a sacrifice of infinite merit on the cross, which could be offered to the Father on behalf of the family of Adam. That justice element would not have been satisfied if Jesus just appeared into the world as an adult, not through any woman, not through any Mary, just came into the world as true God and true man and went through everything he did that we read about in the Gospels, taught, preached, parables, miracles, arrest, passion, death, resurrection, ascension into heaven. If Jesus did all that as someone who just came into the world as an adult without having been born of Mary, then the justice element would not have been satisfied because he offered that up, yes, and God could have accepted that. But he wanted it to be an offering that was from the family of Adam. Jesus had to be connected to the family of Adam. And how was he connected to the family of Adam? Through Mary. Through Mary's yes. And Jesus being born of Mary. That event we celebrate on Christmas Day. Because Jesus is born of Mary, a daughter of Adam, he becomes a son of Adam. He becomes one of us in nature, but one of us as a family member, and could offer what he does on the cross on behalf of that family because he is a member of that family. So that's why it's okay to depict Jesus as a baby with the Madonna, because it shows to us he came into the world through a daughter of Adam, which was necessary for his sacrifice to be on behalf of the family of Adam. So, another reason why to celebrate Christmas. The significance of Jesus, the significance of having midnight mass. I haven't been to midnight mass in 20 years. The last time I went was 1997, because I get tired. And Christmas masses are long. And I would really struggle, especially after I got married and had kids with my wife, of course, that I struggle to be late at night, early morning, in long masses. So I haven't been, and I don't see myself going to a midnight mass in a long time. But I still go to every Christmas mass, of course. But why do we have this tradition, which is very popular? Very popular, and thanks God it's very popular. We've had midnight masses. It began in Rome in the year 430. Pope Sixtus III began the tradition. You probably know why. Because again, there's symbolism involved here. We know from the Gospels Jesus is born at night. Okay? And so, we don't know precisely the time. And so we celebrate, we'll have a mass around those early morning hours. Because that's when we believe what we're told, that Jesus is born in those early morning hours. Okay. Now, and I can see that lasting for a long time. Then we've got the Christmas tree. We're sadly not putting up a Christmas tree in our home this year because of another cultural tradition that we have, and many people, many cultures have, and probably your cultures do. My wife's father sadly passed away suddenly in late August. So this is probably the first time in my life, before and after I got married, that we're not having a Christmas tree put up in the house. Well, what is this Christmas tree thing all about anyway? Some say it originates from Germany, and they've got good grounds to say that. But when we talk about tree, and here Christmas tree in particular, we're really, as you know, talking about a family tree. It's a family tree of Jesus. I remember when I used to work in the city, in the Sydney CBD, and I used to go to lunchtime masses at St Mary's Cathedral. And this is the mid to late 80s. I haven't seen it since, but in that time, they used to have a very beautiful, very large and beautiful Christmas tree erected inside the cathedral. And on either side, they had two scrolls of names coming down, parallel, coming down the Christmas tree. On one side were the names of all the descendants of Jesus, going back to a fellow named Jesse. And then they had on the second scroll all the names of prophets who foretold the coming of the Messiah. Now, for Jesus of Nazareth to qualify as the Messiah, among other things, and we'll have a look at a third one in a moment, two of the important criteria he had to tick off on. The person who claimed to be the Messiah had to show that they were born as a member of the house of David. And they had to show that they satisfied other prophecies. All these prophets that spoke, one of them is Micah. Micah chapter 5 verse 2. Bethlehem Ephrata, Bethlehem in the region of Ephrata, because there's more than one Bethlehem. Bethlehem Ephrata, you are a little one among the thousands of Judah. But out of thee is to come to me he who is to be the ruler of my people Israel, who was born of ancient days, born of old of ancient days. That's a prophecy. So let's look firstly at the fact that the Messiah had to come from the house of David. Why? Where does it say that the Messiah had to come from the house of David? We'll go to 2 Samuel 7. Verses 12 to 13. This is God establishing the covenant with David. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. This is reiterating a promise going back to the time of Abraham, by the way, when he said he'll make Abraham a great name and the father of many nations. And I'll give you land and descendants that number as the stars. And kings will come from your seed, and one who will be a blessing to all the nations. This is just another iteration of the original covenant promises made to Abraham. Anyway, make you a house when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers. I will raise up your offspring after you, offspring after David, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So this is a covenant being made with David, and a promise that there'll be someone from the seed of David who will be great, and his house, his throne, his kingdom will be established forever. Remember what the angel Gabriel said to Mary. God will give him the throne of his father David, and he'll reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his reign shall have no end. The angel Gabriel said that to point to this promise, to this verse in Samuel. Where is this house today that is forever? He'll reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will have no end. Where's the house of David today? I'm jumping ahead to another topic here, really. It's the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. It's the new Israel. The house of David never died out. There's other prophecies you can connect to this, very beautiful one. The Emmanuel prophecy in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. There's Achaz, king of Judah. He's in big trouble. He's besieged. Israel to the north and Aram, Syria, are combining to attack Judah because Judah won't go into coalition with them to fight Assyria. Because Isaiah is telling Achaz, don't go into any coalition because they will fail. You have to trust in Yahweh. And Achaz is panicking. You know? And to reassure Achaz, Isaiah says to Achaz, ask Yahweh for a sign that your throne will last. You have nothing to fear. Achaz feigns humility, false humility. He says, no, I will not tempt the Lord. But Isaiah gives him the sign nevertheless. A child shall be born. A maiden shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. That's the sign. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be Emmanuel. What does that mean? Because in the Hebrew, the word there, Alma, doesn't necessarily translate to virgin. It's equivocal. It could be virgin. It could be any young woman. The Old Testament in the Greek, the Septuagint, the word there in Isaiah 7:14 is Parthenos, which does mean virgin. And that's why it came into the Gospel of Matthew as a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Because Matthew's sourcing his Isaiah prophecies from the Septuagint, not the Hebrew version. And that's interesting, isn't it? It's not such a big deal if you have a young woman having a son, but it is a big deal if a virgin conceives and bears a son, because that doesn't normally happen. And he shall be called Emmanuel, God among us. And who tells us that that word means God among us? It's the Apostle Matthew, when he embeds it in chapter 1 of his gospel. But anyway, there's so much we could say here, but we could run the risk of diverting to other topics. Okay, so back on this Christmas tree in St. Mary's Cathedral, you have all the line, you have to show that the Messiah, that the person claiming to be the Messiah was of the house of David. So we show all the lineage from Jesse through to David. Jesse was the father of David. That's why we call it Jesse tree. And right through to Jesus. And that's why we get the apostles Matthew and Luke bothering to show a genealogy, a link back through to David and even back further to Abraham and even back further to Adam. Luke goes right back to Adam. And you've got the prophets. I'll give you another prophecy that's important here. Okay, I think I already started with it. Well, let's finish it. Bethlehem Ephratah, you are a little one among the thousands of Judah. Now, I'm at work once, a couple of years ago, and this very important fellow in our organisation actually speaking to hundreds of us and says, well, we're not sure if, tradition tells us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but we're not really sure. I'm thinking, oh, well, you better be sure. Because if Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem, then he wasn't truly the Messiah. He'll be a false Messiah. And if he's a false Messiah, you need to resign. Because you're running a Catholic organisation, and this Catholic Church would have no credibility if Jesus Christ had no credibility, was not authentically the Messiah. I only belong to the Catholic Church because I believe Jesus Christ founded it and he is the Messiah. And if he wasn't born in Bethlehem, he couldn't tick off on that box. And so we have to show that Jesus, and that's why Matthew goes out of his way, and Luke both go out of their way to show that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. To show that, we know we call him Jesus of Nazareth, and people know him to be a Nazarene, and they use that as a derogatory term, but Jesus was actually born in Bethlehem. And so we use the Christmas tree to symbolise the genealogy of Christ and the fulfillment of many, many prophecies. We can give a whole talk and a half on the various prophecies that Christians claim from the Old Testament which were fulfilled by Jesus of Nazareth. All right, now let's look at other aspects of modern day Christmas. What's this St. Nicholas thing or this Santa Claus thing? Well, the St. Nicholas thing is a good thing because there was a St. Nicholas, 4th century saint from Myra. Where's Myra? Southern Turkey, on the coast, Mediterranean coast. St. Nicholas goes down in history for a number of good reasons. He was one of those few bishops who maintained the Orthodox Catholic position on the divinity of Christ as opposed to the ascendant Arianism of his day. And he was at the Council of Nicaea. It got a little bit heated at Nicaea at times. This is in the year 325. St. Nicholas wasn't so saintly on one occasion and punched up one of the Arian bishops at that council. So, yeah, but anyway, St. Nicholas comes to us and is connected to Christmas because of the pious legend. And when I say legend, I don't mean fictional. I mean a story worthy of reading, where he actually assisted 3 young women with their dowries so they could marry. Because if they didn't marry, they couldn't afford to provide a dowry. They wouldn't have been able to marry and they would have been forced to go into prostitution in order to survive. And so St. Nicholas of Myra threw in anonymously, bags of gold through the window of their house, the father's house, and these bags of gold just happened to land in the stockings that were hanging over the fireplace, or something to that effect. Actually, this is what it really was. The bags of gold tossed through an open window are said to have landed in stockings or shoes left before the fire to dry. This led to the custom of children hanging stockings or putting out shoes, eagerly awaiting gifts from St. Nicholas. And so St. Nicholas is a gift giver. Okay, so that's one reason why we associate giving gifts at Christmas time. Now, in Europe, December the 6th, and in Eastern Orthodoxy and Eastern Catholicism, December the 6th is a big day. St. Nicholas is a big, big saint, particularly in Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy. And so, as far as I'm aware, if you're in Europe and you're among good, pious people around December 6th, that's when they give their presents, not necessarily December 25. Okay? And I should mention, back to that carol that we talked about, the 12 days of Christmas. On the first day, on the second day, we receive these various gifts. Christmas is actually a season, it's not a day. Christmas was 12 days in length, where the church celebrates the birth of Jesus on December 25th and the coming of the 3 wise men on January the 6th. So we have that 12-day period. That's Christmas. It's a season, 12 days, and that Christmas carol fitted into those 12 days, and a different gift is given on each of the 12 days of Christmas. You know a bit of Shakespeare. He's played Twelfth Night of Christmas season. All right? Now, we're on the theme here of gifts and Christmas. So when you think about Christmas and gifts, you also think about the 3 wise men, or the 3 kings who come to Jesus. This is very interesting for many reasons, and probably for some biblical scholars very problematic. Let's go to Luke's Gospel. And Luke's Gospel has Jesus presented in the temple at the age of 40 days. You read this in chapter 2. And then Luke tells us that Jesus, Mary and Joseph then go back to Nazareth. And Jesus grows up wise and strong and in favour before God and man, etc. You read that, Luke. But Luke, what about what Matthew talks about? Luke mentions nothing about Jesus, about the star of Bethlehem, the 3 wise men coming, Herod seeking to destroy the baby Jesus, the angel Gabriel coming to St. Joseph and warning the Holy Family and they escape into Egypt. And then the soldiers of Herod coming and committing the massacre of the innocents in and around Bethlehem. Luke mentions none of it. My belief is that Luke was completely unaware of it. I believe Luke's writing his gospel before Matthew writes his gospel. I believe Mark's written first, Luke comes second, gives us more information, writing his gospel for Theophilus to give an orderly account. But Luke was not one of the original 12 disciples, 12 apostles. He comes later on in the scene, and Matthew is not immediately in the vicinity because Matthew's gone down to Ethiopia, down the Nile, to do missionary work there. When he writes his gospel, he writes it post-Luke and adds this material that I've just mentioned that is not in Luke. Luke just presumed that they went back to Nazareth, glosses over that period. Matthew gives us the rest. Some other biblical scholars of the critical school tell us that Matthew made it all up. None of this really happened. He was lying. He was writing his gospel to convince Jews to follow Jesus of Nazareth, and to convince Jews, he had to show that Jesus fulfilled certain prophecies. These prophecies, for example. Numbers 24:17. This comes out of Balaam, the mouth of Balaam. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of the sons of Sheth. Now, some Christians over the centuries take this prophecy of Balaam and say, oh, that refers to the Star of Bethlehem. A star will come out of Jacob. And Matthew tells us about the star that led the Magi, the three wise men. They were not kings, they were wise men. They were loosely called magicians, but they were astrologers. An astrologer was someone who practiced astronomy, as we know it and call it today, but also trying to know and understand and predict things by the movement of the planets and the stars. All right? So Matthew's writing to show that this prophecy is fulfilled in the star that the wise men followed to come to Bethlehem, to Jerusalem, then Bethlehem. Me personally, I don't see that this prophecy relates to the star of Bethlehem. This prophecy relates to Jesus Christ. A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel. That star and scepter is Jesus. Okay? The star doesn't come out of Jacob. The star is seen by the wise men who are coming from the east. But nevertheless, Matthew's saying there was a star, and he's writing that because he believes, well, the early Christians believed that that star fulfilled that prophecy. Psalm 72, verses 10 to 11. Now, the wise men, we say three wise men, but we don't know if they are three wise men. We say they're three because they bring gifts, and there's three named: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So we presume three gifts, three wise men. Anyway, Matthew tells us about the three wise men and their gifts because there's another prophecy in Psalm 72. It says the following: the kings of Tarshish and of distant shores will bring tribute to him. The kings of Sheba and Seba will present him gifts. All kings will bow down to him, and all nations will serve him. Now, this is so written according to the mindset, the geographical understanding of the world of this time. Because if you know where Tarshish is, it's in Spain. So from the perspective of Jerusalem, it's the western ends of the earth. Sheba is Yemen, to the southeast extremity of the Arabian Peninsula. It's another extreme point. Seba is across the Red Sea, where basically that part of Eritrea, Somalia, that part of Africa, other side of the Red Sea. So the Gentiles will come and acknowledge this Messiah and give him gifts. Then we have Isaiah's prophecy, Isaiah 66. Caravans of camels shall fill you, dromedaries from Midian and Ephah, all from Sheba shall come bearing gold and frankincense and proclaiming the praises of the Lord. So Matthew's writing what he's writing about the wise men and their gifts because they fulfill these prophecies. Gentiles coming and bringing gifts and acknowledging the Messiah, Jesus as the Messiah. Anyway, Tradition tells us, not scripture, tradition tells us, and it's a small t tradition. I wouldn't call it apostolic tradition. It's just, something that's been passed on piously over the centuries. The names of these three wise men. As I said, they're not kings. I think that's more of a 19th century Christmas carol than actual tradition or scripture. It was important, though, that this Messiah, who was coming for the Jews, through the Jews, but also for everyone else in the world, we needed to show that he was acknowledged by Gentile peoples, because he was coming for Gentile peoples as well. The names we have, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, come from extra-biblical traditions. We have the documents that come from the 6th century, Greek documents, translated then later into Latin. The Excerpta Latina Barbari, another document, Collectanea or Excerpta et Collectanea. They continue this idea of the three wise men and gives us clues about their identity. So this document, I'll read out the name properly now, Excerpta et Collectanea. Melchior, according to this document, was actually from Arabia. Now I can see that this document is the source that tells us that they were kings, because Melchior was a king of Arabia, had long grey beard and gave gold as a gift, symbolizing that he accepted Christ as king. And Balthazar was king of Ethiopia, middle-aged, bearded, and he brought the gift of frankincense to recognize that Jesus was a priest. And Caspar was the younger of the three, and he came from Tarsus, the same town as St. Paul in Southeast Asia Minor. And he brought myrrh, and myrrh was used to make medicines, to symbolize that Jesus came as a doctor, as a healer. All right. You don't have to accept anything from this document as late as the 6th century. Perhaps it's based largely on legend. But I like the symbolism. Gold, frankincense and myrrh. Those three gifts together paint us a picture of Jesus and his mission. He was a king, also a priest. He's from the house of David, so he was a king, the King of Kings, and he's a priest offering a sacrifice of himself, and that will bring healing to the nations. And of course, the whole point of the whole story of these kings who are really wise men, again, back to the scripture, magoi, magicians, astrologers, astronomers, etc. This reinforces the whole custom of gift giving at Christmas time. And the tradition of carol singing has ancient origins. I told you, I argue that the angels appearing on the birth at the time when Jesus was born was a type of Christmas carol. Glory to God in the highest. I mean, we do incorporate those words into Christmas carols. From the 4th century, we have St. Ambrose when he was Archbishop of Milan. He apparently composed a hymn, Veni Redemptor Gentium, come Redeemer of the peoples, or of the Gentiles. But that was a Christmas carol, but it was also an apologetical statement against Arianism, which denied the divinity of Christ. And we get another Christmas carol in the early 5th century from the Spanish poet Prudencius, titled Corde Natus ex Parentis, out of the Father's heart begotten. And that was being sung in churches in the early 5th century. But in the modern sense, carols exploded as a popular expression of our faith around Christmas time, actually from England and Protestant England in the 19th century, or gained more popularity and traction in Protestant countries, Lutheran countries, and from the 19th century onwards in England, etc. And it's a beautiful tradition that we need to maintain. Again, it's one of those traditions that's under stress when it comes to Christmas. Christmas is under stress because of secularization and commercialization. And I'll lead now onto that point and that issue. Because I'm talking about what's true and beautiful and good about Christmas, but there's some disturbing movements here we have to look at. The fact that we have gifts given at Christmas is probably a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because, it's better to give than to receive. So it's a good Christian act to do. It's also commercialization. Commercialization can help preserve Christmas, at least on the calendar, as an event. Someone was just telling me the other day, the obvious. As society becomes more secular, well, Christmas is under grave threat. But they're never going to really abolish Christmas totally because they need it for business. It's true. So my argument is, because business is going to need it for good business, their peak sales period, etc., we need to piggyback on it and add the Jesus bit to it. Keep the Jesus flavour into it. That reminds me of another story of a friend of mine when he was in a shopping centre. He was once going down an escalator and there was a nativity scene there, the Jesus, Mary, Joseph nativity scene with sheep and goats and all. And one woman was angrily mumbling under her breath, there are always some people who have to push religion into everything, forgetting the fact that Christmas's origins are religious, strictly speaking. But now we're in the position where we have to piggyback. It's going to stay as a commercial event. And now it's become post-Christmas sales. And the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. And the Melbourne Test cricket match. And all, okay, but they're embedded in the calendar, and therefore we can take advantage of that to piggyback on it and keep the Christian flavour into it. So commercialisation has that benefit because it entrenches this day in the calendar. It won't totally disappear. But the threat of commercialisation is that it's mutating the event. And it's done it subtly over the last 100 years or so. Now, a lot of things about the commercial secular side of Christmas are pretty harmless, okay? We've got Santa Claus. And you notice when I talked about St. Nicholas, I didn't mention Santa Claus. I mentioned the original St. Nicholas, who was a true historical figure, and he was a very generous man, and it helped build that tradition within Christmas of gift giving. But Santa Claus comes in the scene around 1920 as an American commercial figure to promote Coca-Cola, right? And okay, he's a big jolly man in a red suit, and that will tell us that his origins, if you know anything, you can do a bit of research, that this is a derivation or a corruption of a man in a red vestments, a bishop. Because Santa Claus, the original Santa Nicholas, was a bishop. So Santa Claus for me is a harmless figure. I have no problem having a photo with Santa, but I can't sit on his knee anymore. But my kids have always had, well, they've stopped now, but they always had in their growing years pictures with Santa, and I have no problem with it. But it is one step removed. It's the first step towards that rampant secularization we suffer from today. Same with a good Christmas carol like Bing Crosby's I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. It's become traditional and it's beautiful. And Hollywood's promoted it, and we all love hearing it, and we'll play it at home every Christmas. But does it really focus or mention anywhere Jesus Christ? No. Nice, soothing, beautiful, inspirational, but Jesus isn't mentioned. So it's another step away. And then, of course, you get Santa's little helpers up in the North Pole. The elves busily away working. That's all cute. We want our toys on time, keep working. We love to hear about the elves. It's a nice story you tell the kids, Santa up there in North Pole, sharing next door to Superman's house there in the North Pole. Okay. Superman is the hero you want to believe in when you don't believe in Jesus Christ. That's how I look at it. Okay. He's the superhero for those who are looking for salvation or inspiration or hope which is really found in Jesus Christ. Then you've got Rudolph and his reindeer. Santa's up there, needs his team of helpers. He needs a delivery system. It's Rudolph and the red nose flashing away. Okay, and of course, you're not going to have this poor ex-bishop single. You've got to have Mrs. Claus now, because Santa Claus is, and I don't want to be offensive, but Santa Claus has become Anglican so he can marry, and you've got Mrs. Claus, and okay. And then Frosty the Snowman turns up, and okay. Now, none of these things are inherently bad, but it's the trajectory. It's the tendentialism, the tendency, the movement away. So younger generations grow up, they don't know about really Jesus is at the core of it. When I'm growing up, and I'd still do it, even today, even this Christmas Eve, I'd love to pull out Little Drummer Boy and watch it. Even though it's a fable, it's a story, it's not historical, it's not scriptural, it's focused on Jesus Christ. And that's okay, that's fine, that's beautiful. And I'll watch it, and I was watching it from the age of 4 or 5 onwards, and I'll still watch it. Those other cartoons, they're harmless, as I said, but they're making us forget, get off focus. We're not on focus that it's about Jesus Christ. But it's getting worse. Just last year, had that Jennifer Aniston movie come out, Office Christmas Party, and I hope none of you saw it. No. Good, because we can't fund this type of activity. But Office Christmas Story, okay, it's about Christmas, great, let's watch it. Well, what is it about? They're told, the workers are told not to call it a Christmas party. Instead, call it a non-denominational holiday mixer. Because it's more inclusive. Because they recognise Christmas, too Christian, too Catholic, that's exclusive, Just call it something else that's, takes away from its original meaning, that is, around Jesus Christ, and make it inclusive of everyone and everything and all beliefs. But in this movie, you have Christ mocked. You have his nativity mocked. You have a cursing Santa who knocks down a nativity scene. You have a movie filled with bad language, curses and profanities, and we call this a Christmas movie. Now, just the other day, I'm driving. I do a lot of driving in my work from parish to parish, school to school. And a fellow who's got a slot on 2GB radio station was actually bewailing what's happening, or what's been happening very recently in Kmart. Kmart is not calling it Christmas Day. They're calling Boxing Day, Boxing Day, and they're calling New Year's Day, but they're not calling Christmas Day, Christmas Day. They're calling it Family Day. And that's the next step towards de-Christianization. What's our response? Our response, just to sum up now, is to keep what's good and true and beautiful about Christmas in its place. You do that firstly in your hearts, in your minds, remembering always, not forgetting the obvious, that it's about Jesus Christ. And have that spread to your immediate family, and show that at home. Show it in the Christmas decorations, show it in the Christmas tree, show it in the nativity set. Show it in the outdoor lights that you have. It became very popular in the last couple of decades following the trend in the United States to cover our houses with Christmas decoration. That was beautiful. For most part, it was a form of subtle neighbourly evangelization. Sure, you can have your Santa Clauses and you can have your reindeers, but a lot of people had the nativity scenes out there. A lot of them had the Jesus and Mary lights, angel lights, all that. Star of Bethlehem, etc. And that's keeping it public, Christmas. Keeping that aspect alive. And that's what we have to do. Don't buy Santa Claus Christmas cards. Buy nativity Christmas cards. Give them out. Preserve these little traditions. Preserve and also extend Christmas beyond December 25. It's so obvious now. As soon as December 25 is over, we shut Christmas down in the public mind. We go straight to the Boxing Day sales. We go straight to the test match in Melbourne. We go straight to the Sydney to Hobart yacht race, as I mentioned earlier. We go straight into sport. And then we go straight into the revelry of New Year's Day. And Christmas has come and gone in a flash. We're keeping it there because it's going to make us a lot of money. We have to keep it there because it's going to make us a lot of salvation. That's the most important point. And on that point, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.